The afternoon light filtered through the tall windows of the Sinclair estate as Robert Sinclair reviewed another resignation letter from yet another household employee. At 36, the tech mogul had built an empire worth hundreds of millions, but he could not seem to find anyone who could manage his most precious responsibility, caring for his 7-year-old daughter, Emma. Since his wife's death 3 years earlier, Emma had become increasingly difficult for staff to handle. She had driven away a succession of nannies, housekeepers, and caretakers with behavior that ranged from silent withdrawal to explosive tantrums. The latest departure had left Robert with a familiar sense of frustration and worry about his daughter's emotional state. When the employment agency called about a new candidate, Robert felt the weary resignation of someone who had been disappointed too many times. "She is different from the others," the coordinator assured him. "Isabella Cross has experience with children who have experienced trauma, and she specifically requested to work with challenging situations." Robert was working in his home office when he heard something that made him pause, the sound of gentle laughter coming from Emma's room. It had been months since he had heard his daughter laugh, and the unfamiliar sound drew him down the hallway to investigate. Through the partially open door, Robert saw Isabella sitting on the floor beside Emma's bed. The new caregiver appeared, to be in her late 20s with blonde hair braided back practically, wearing simple clothes rather than the formal uniforms previous staff had preferred. What struck Robert most was her posture, completely relaxed and patient as she sat with Emma, who was curled up under her covers, but clearly engaged in conversation. "I do not want to get up," Emma was saying, her voice carrying the stubborn tone Robert had grown accustomed to hearing. "That is perfectly fine," Isabella replied calmly. "Sometimes beds are the best place to be. Can you tell me what makes your bed feel safe today?" Robert was surprised by Isabella's response. Previous caregivers had either tried to coax Emma out of bed with bribes or had become frustrated with her refusal to participate in daily activities. Isabella seemed genuinely curious about Emma's feelings, rather than focused on changing her behavior. "It is warm under here and no one can see me if I do not want them to," Emma explained. "That sounds very comfortable," Isabella agreed. "You know what? I think beds can be excellent places for all sorts of activities. Would you like to see something special I can do from right here?" Robert watched as Isabella pulled a small collection of colored scarves from her bag and began a gentle juggling routine that she performed while sitting cross-legged on the floor. The scarves floated and danced in the air, creating patterns that were mesmerizing without being overwhelming. Emma peeked out from under her covers, clearly intrigued despite herself. "How do you do that?" "Practice and patience," Isabella replied, catching the scarves gracefully. "Would you like me to teach you? We can start with just one scarf and you can learn from your bed if that feels more comfortable." Over the next hour, Robert watched in amazement as Isabella gradually engaged Emma in activities that respected the child's need for emotional safety, while gently encouraging participation. When Emma wanted to stay under her covers, Isabella found ways to include the blankets in their games. When Emma expressed anger about missing her mother, Isabella listened without trying to fix or change the feelings. "My mama used to read to me every night," Emma said at one point, her voice small and sad. "That sounds like a beautiful memory," Isabella replied. "What was your favorite story that she read?" "She would make up stories about a princess who lived in a castle made of clouds," Emma said, sitting up slightly in her bed. "The princess could fly anywhere she wanted and she was never scared." "That sounds like a very wise princess," Isabella said thoughtfully. "Do you think she might like to have some new adventures? Maybe we could continue her story together sometime." Robert felt his throat tighten as he realized that Isabella was not trying to replace Emma's memories of her mother, but rather honoring them and finding ways to build upon them. This approach was fundamentally different from previous caregivers, who had seemed uncomfortable with Emma's grief and had tried to distract her from it rather than helping her process it. As the afternoon progressed, Robert noticed that Emma gradually became more animated and engaged. Isabella had a remarkable ability to follow Emma's emotional cues, providing comfort when she needed it and gentle challenge when she was ready for it. More importantly, She treated Emma's difficult behaviors as communications about her emotional needs, rather than problems to be solved. When dinner time arrived, Robert expected the usual battle about Emma coming downstairs to eat. Instead, he heard Isabella suggest that they have a cloud princess picnic in Emma's room, complete with a blanket spread on the floor and special foods that a flying princess might enjoy. "Mr. Sinclair?" Isabella's voice came from behind him as he stood in the hallway, having been discovered in his eavesdropping. Robert turned, slightly embarrassed at being caught listening. "I was just checking to see how Emma was adjusting to having you here." Isabella smiled with understanding rather than judgment. "She is a remarkable little girl. She has been carrying some very big feelings, and I think she just needed someone to help her feel safe enough to share them." "Isabella, can I ask you something?" Robert said. "Emma has been through many caregivers, and none of them lasted more than a few weeks. What makes you think you can succeed where others have not?" Isabella considered the question carefully before responding. "Mr. Sinclair, I do not think the other caregivers failed because they were not good people or skilled professionals. I think they failed because they were trying to help Emma get back to being the child she was before her mother died." "And you are not trying to do that?" Robert asked. "No, sir. I am trying to help Emma become the child she is now, with all her grief and strength and wisdom. The little girl who lived through losing her mother is not broken. She is changed, and she deserves to have that change honored rather than erased." Robert felt something shift in his understanding as he processed Isabella's words. For 3 years, he had been hoping that Emma would eventually return to being the carefree child she had been before the tragedy. Isabella was suggesting that this expectation might actually be hindering Emma's healing. Emma has been seeing therapists and grief counselors, but her behavior has not improved significantly. What do you think you can offer that professional treatment cannot?" "I think Emma needs someone who can be present with her exactly as she is right now, without trying to move her through her grief faster than she is ready to go," Isabella replied. "Professional treatment is important, but day-to-day care needs to come from someone who sees her current emotional state as valid rather than as something to be fixed." 6 months later, Robert stood in the same hallway, listening to Emma and Isabella plan a birthday party for the Cloud Princess, complete with flying games and sky-themed decorations. Emma's laughter had returned, but it was different now, deeper and more grounded, reflecting a child who had learned to carry joy alongside sadness. "Isabella," Robert said that evening after Emma had gone to bed, "I need to thank you for what you have done for Emma. She is still the same child who misses her mother, but she is no longer drowning in that grief." Isabella smiled, looking toward Emma's room where soft music played as the little girl fell asleep. "Mr. Sinclair, Emma taught me something important too. She showed me that healing is not about forgetting pain or pretending it did not happen. It is about learning to build a life that has room for both sorrow and joy, and trusting that we are strong enough to hold both. Sometimes the impossible becomes possible, not when we try to change someone, but when we learn to see them clearly and love them exactly as they are, trusting that acceptance can create the safety necessary for natural growth and healing to occur."